you just bought something you cannot afford. Not because the price tag was too high, because of what happens after you pay it. Somewhere between the swipe of the card and the first year of ownership, a quiet mechanism kicks in. It has no name in most conversations about money, but it has ended more fortunes than bad investments, bad luck, and bad markets combined. What is it? Lifestyle creep. That is the phrase economists use for it. But the phrase is too soft for what it actually does. It does not feel like a mistake while it is happening. It feels like arrival. It feels like proof. You worked hard. You earned this. You deserve the car, the watch, the house with the view. In this video, we'll explore the 10 benefits of drinking jasmine green tea exactly as designed. Here is the strange part. This is not a story about people who never had money. This is a story about people who had enormous amounts of it. Boxers, rappers, actors, athletes, lottery winners. People who reached the very top of their industries, earned tens of millions of dollars, and lost almost all of it within a decade. Not because the money ran out on its own, because their spending grew exactly as fast as their income did. Sometimes faster. Let's start with a number that should stop you. Sports Illustrated once estimated that within 5 years of retirement, 78% of former NFL players had gone bankrupt or were under financial stress. 78%. These are men who signed contracts worth millions. Men who had agents, accountants, financial advisors circling them from the moment they were drafted. And still, the majority of them ended up broke. How does that happen to someone earning that much money? It happens one purchase at a time. A new car for every member of the family. A bigger house than the one before it. A watch that costs more than most people's annual salary, bought not because it tells better time, but because it tells a story about who you've become. None of these purchases feel reckless in isolation. Each one feels earned. Each one feels like the natural next step. That is the trap. Lifestyle creep does not arrive as a single bad decision. It arrives as 100 good feeling ones. Take Mike Tyson. At his peak, Tyson earned somewhere around $400 million over the course of his boxing career. $400 million. By 2003, he filed for bankruptcy, listing debts of roughly $27 million against assets far smaller than that. Where did it go? Tyson himself has talked about it publicly since then. Mansions, a fleet of luxury cars, a pair of white Bengal tigers that cost over $100,000 a year just to maintain, with a private handler on staff, jewelry. Enterages of people paid simply to be around him. Every single purchase, on its own, looked like the reward for being the biggest name in the sport. Together, they became the machine that consumed $400 million faster than it was earned. Or take MC Hammer. In the late 80s and early 90s, "You Can't Touch This" made him one of the wealthiest entertainers alive, with estimates of his fortune reaching around $70 million. He built a 40-room mansion in California. He kept a private zoo on the property. He employed over 200 people directly, from bodyguards to assistants to an enormous touring entourage, many of them friends from before he was famous. By 1996, he filed for bankruptcy. The mansion alone reportedly cost him around $30,000 a month just in upkeep before a single tour date or business expense. Does that number sound familiar? It should. It is the same shape as Tyson's story, just with a different soundtrack. Here's the reframe. The real wealth killer is not the price of any single luxury item. A car, a watch, a house. None of these things bankrupt anyone by itself. The real wealth killer is what psychologists and economists both point to as the same underlying force. Your spending rising to match, or exceed, your income every single time your income rises. It has a name in behavioral economics. Hedonic adaptation. You get used to a level of comfort astonishingly fast, and once you're used to it, going backward feels like loss, even if going backward just means returning to how you lived 2 years ago. This is why lottery winners fail at a rate that should terrify anyone who has ever fantasized about winning one. Multiple studies, including research published by the National Bureau of Economic Research, have tracked lottery winners over time and found that a significant percentage file for bankruptcy within 3 to 5 years of their win, often at rates higher than the general population despite starting with a massive cash windfall. The money did not disappear because these people were foolish. It disappeared because nothing in their financial habits changed except the number in the bank account. The spending simply grew to fill whatever space the new income created. Isn't that the opposite of what you'd expect? A cash windfall, the very thing most people believe would fix their financial life permanently, statistically fixes almost nothing. Because the underlying habits that shape a person's relationship with money rarely change just because the number in their account suddenly did. Now, here is where it gets uncomfortable because this is not just a story about celebrities and boxers and lottery winners. This is a story about anyone whose expenses quietly climb every time their paycheck does. You get a raise, and within a month, your rent is higher, your car payment is higher, your subscriptions have multiplied, your dinners out have gotten more expensive. None of these changes feel like a decision. They feel like a natural upgrade to match your new life. But add them together over 5 years, and the gap between what you earn and what you keep has not grown. It has stayed exactly the same or shrunk. You made more. You kept the same amount or less. That is lifestyle creep, and it is nearly invisible while it's happening to you. Let's talk about cars specifically, because the automotive industry understands this psychological mechanism better than almost anyone. A brand new car loses roughly 20% of its value the moment it leaves the dealership lot, and around 60% of its value within the first 5 years, according to data consistently reported by Kelley Blue Book and Carfax. Depreciation curve, that's the term for this. It simply means the rate at which an asset loses value over time. A luxury car has one of the steepest depreciation curves of any purchase a person can make. You are not buying an asset. You are renting a feeling and paying an enormous premium for the privilege. This is exactly why old money families, the ones with wealth stretching back generations, tend to drive the opposite of what you'd expect. Warren Buffett, one of the richest people alive, was famously photographed for years driving a Cadillac DTS that he'd owned for over half a decade, a car worth a small fraction of a percent of his net worth. He was not doing this to seem humble for cameras. He was doing it because, to someone who actually understands compounding, spending an extra $200,000 on a depreciating asset represents an opportunity cost far larger than the sticker price suggests. What could that money have become instead? Left alone to grow for 20 years. Here's the counterintuitive twist. The people who look the wealthiest are often the ones bleeding the most money. And the people who could afford the most extravagance often display the least of it. Researchers Thomas Stanley and William Danko documented this directly in their study of American millionaires, published as The Millionaire Next Door. They found that a majority of self-made millionaires in America drive used cars, live in middle-class neighborhoods, and spend far less on visible luxury than people with a fraction of their net worth. Meanwhile, many people who appear wealthy through their cars, homes, and clothing are, on paper, deeply in debt, financing an image rather than owning an asset. Sociologists call this conspicuous consumption, a term coined over a century ago by economist Thorstein Veblen. It means spending money specifically to display wealth or status to other people, rather than for the private enjoyment of the thing itself. A Bugatti Chiron, for instance, starts at around $3 million. Yet Bugatti has openly stated that the company loses money on every single unit it produces because the engineering hand assembly and materials cost more than even that enormous price tag covers. Why would anyone buy something the manufacturer itself loses money making? Because the entire value proposition is not the car. It's what the car signals to everyone who sees it. And that signal is exactly what lifestyle creep is built on, not the actual comfort of the thing. The story the thing tells about you to other people, and eventually to yourself. Once you've told that story once, walking it back feels like admitting something. That's why the trap holds so tightly. It's not really about the car, the watch, or the house. It's about identity. And identity is much harder to downsize than a monthly payment. Nicolas Cage is one of the more extreme examples of this pattern playing out over decades rather than years. At his peak, Cage was earning tens of millions of dollars per film, with an estimated career total exceeding $150 million in earnings across his career. He purchased 2 private islands in the Bahamas, a medieval German castle, a shrunken pygmy skull that reportedly cost him around $250,000, a fleet of exotic cars including multiple Ferraris and a rare Lamborghini. By 2009, he owed the IRS more than $6 million in back taxes and was forced to sell off large parts of that collection just to cover the debt. Cage himself later said in interviews that he simply kept spending as though the income would never stop. Doesn't that sound like every single story you've heard so far? That's the pattern hiding underneath every one of these names. Tyson, Hammer, Cage. Countless lottery winners and athletes whose stories never made headlines. None of them lost their money to a single catastrophic decision. They lost it to the accumulation of decisions that each felt small, each felt earned, each felt like simply living at the level they had reached. The wealth killer isn't a scandal. It's a habit repeated quietly for years until the math finally catches up. So, what actually protects people from this? The research points to something almost boring by comparison to the mansions and the tigers and the private islands. It's a gap. Specifically, the gap between what you earn and what you spend kept wide and kept growing, regardless of how much your income rises. Financial researchers sometimes call this your savings rate, and it is, by a wide margin, one of the strongest predictors of long-term wealth, far stronger than the size of your income itself. Two people can earn identical amounts over a lifetime and end up in completely different financial positions, purely based on how wide that gap stayed. This is the modern mirror, and it applies whether you're earning $40,000 a year or $400 million. Every time your income rises, there's a quiet decision waiting. Let your spending rise to match it, and you'll feel richer for a while, right up until you don't. Or let the gap widen instead, and the feeling of wealth arrives more slowly. But it arrives for real, compounding quietly in the background while everyone around you is compounding their car payments instead. Think about your own last raise, your last bonus, your last unexpected windfall. Where did it go? Did the gap between what you earned and what you spent get wider? Or did it stay exactly where it was, absorbed instantly into a slightly nicer version of the life you already had? Most people can't answer that question honestly on the first try because lifestyle creep is designed to be invisible from the inside. It only becomes visible when you zoom out. The way Tyson had to, the way Hammer had to, the way Cage had to, at the exact moment the money finally ran out. There's a detail in almost every one of these stories that rarely gets mentioned, and it might be the most important one. Very little of this spending was actually paid for in cash. Tyson's cars, Hammer's mansion, Cage's islands, much of it was financed, leveraged, or backed by loans against future earnings that were assumed, wrongly, to keep arriving at the same pace forever. This is where the wealth killer becomes something closer to a wealth trap. A financed luxury purchase doesn't just cost you the depreciation, it costs you monthly payments, interest, and insurance every single month, whether your income that month matches last year's or not. A car that once felt like proof of arrival becomes quietly a fixed obligation that has to be met regardless of circumstances. This is exactly why exotic car dealerships, private banks, and luxury retailers have built entire financing divisions specifically around this exact psychology. Rolls-Royce, Ferrari, and Bentley all operate in-house financial services arms, offering leases structured so that a person earning what sounds like enormous money on paper can drive a $400,000 car for what looks like a manageable monthly payment. The dealership isn't lying about the number, but that manageable sounding payment assumes your income never dips, never pauses, never gets interrupted by an injury, a bad year, a shift in the market, or simply getting older in an industry that rewards youth. Bespoke coach building, a term used for cars built to a single customer's custom specification, rather than mass-produced, can push that number even higher, sometimes past $1 million. Entirely financed against an income stream that may not exist in 5 years the way it exists today. There's another name worth mentioning here because his story shows the same pattern operating even without a single catastrophic collapse. Floyd Mayweather has earned an estimated $1 billion across his boxing career, more than almost any athlete in history. He has also been remarkably open about his spending. Private jets, a car collection reportedly worth over $20 million, including multiple Bugattis, several Rolls-Royces, and a Koenigsegg. He nicknamed himself Money Mayweather and built an entire public persona around visible, constant spending. Unlike Tyson or Hammer, Mayweather hasn't gone bankrupt. But financial analysts who've studied his finances point out that a boxer's earning window is brutally short, a handful of prime years compared to a lifetime of expenses that don't shrink once the fights stop. The gap he's relying on isn't income versus spending. It's spending versus whatever's left once the fighting years end. That's a much thinner cushion than it looks like from the outside. Compare that to someone like Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's longtime business partner, who lived for decades in the same house he purchased long before Berkshire Hathaway made him a billionaire. Munger himself said in interviews that he never saw the appeal of upgrading his lifestyle simply because his net worth had grown, describing extravagant spending as something that mostly just complicates a person's life without meaningfully improving it. Two men, both extraordinarily successful in their fields, both capable of buying nearly anything they wanted. One built his identity around visible spending. The other built his around the gap he never let close. Which one do you think slept better during a bad year? There's a psychological term for why the Mayweather path feels so good in the moment despite the risk sitting underneath it. It's called the hedonic treadmill. First described by psychologists Philip Brickman and Donald Campbell in the 1970s. The idea is simple and a little bleak. Humans adapt to positive changes in circumstances remarkably fast, returning to roughly the same baseline level of satisfaction within months, regardless of how significant the improvement was. Studies following actual lottery winners found their reported happiness levels, measured a year or more after their win, were statistically close to a control group who'd won nothing at all. The new car stops feeling new. The bigger house stops feeling big. And the only way to recreate that initial rush is to upgrade again. Sound familiar? This is precisely why the old money versus new money distinction exists as a real observable pattern, not just a cultural stereotype. Old money families have typically had multiple generations to watch this exact treadmill destroy other families' fortunes, and they built cultural habits specifically designed to resist it. Understatement over display. Assets that appreciate over assets that depreciate. Private wealth over visible wealth. New money, by contrast, is often earned suddenly by people with no inherited playbook for how to handle it, arriving with every incentive in the surrounding culture, advertising, social media, peer pressure, pointing toward the exact behaviors that erode it fastest. It's not that new money is less intelligent. It's that new money hasn't yet learned the lesson the hard way, or watched a parent learn it first. Social media has made this treadmill spin faster than at any point in history. A century ago, conspicuous consumption was visible mainly to your immediate neighborhood, the people who could physically see your house or your car. Today, a single post can put your lifestyle in front of millions of strangers within seconds, and the feedback, likes, comments, follows arise instantly, creating a much more powerful reward loop than a neighbor glancing at your driveway ever could. Financial researchers have started calling this phenomenon digital keeping up with the Joneses, and early studies suggest that heavier social media use correlates with higher reported financial stress and higher credit card debt, even after controlling for income. You're not just competing with your actual neighbors anymore. You're competing with a highlight reel of everyone you've ever followed, most of whom are quietly struggling with the exact same gap you are. So what does resisting this actually look like practically for someone who isn't a boxer or a billionaire? It rarely looks dramatic. It looks like automating a portion of every raise directly into savings or investments before you ever see it in your checking account, so the money never has the chance to quietly get absorbed into a nicer version of normal. It looks like waiting deliberately before any large purchase, giving the initial emotional rush time to fade so you can see whether you actually want the thing or just wanted the feeling attached to it. It looks like separating the two questions that lifestyle creep constantly blurs together. Can I afford this? And will this still feel worth it in a year? Those are very different questions, and almost every one of the stories in this video came from someone who only ever asked the first one. None of this means the car, the watch, or the house is the villain of the story. Objects don't destroy fortunes. Decisions do, repeated quietly enough that they stop feeling like decisions at all. A single luxury purchase, made deliberately, paid for in full, understood clearly for what it costs and what it doesn't, has never bankrupted anyone. What bankrupts people is the momentum. The sense that last year's version of your life is no longer good enough now that this year's income has arrived, and that the only acceptable direction is up, permanently, regardless of whether the income keeps climbing to match it. That's the part almost nobody tells you when they talk about wealth. Building it and keeping it require almost opposite instincts. Building wealth often rewards ambition, risk, and a willingness to spend on the image that opens doors. Keeping wealth rewards restraint, patience, and a willingness to look from the outside like you have far less than you actually do, Munger understood that. Buffett understood that. The families with money that survives 3, 4, 5 generations understood it before either of them were born and built entire cultures of understatement, specifically to protect against the instinct that feels most natural the moment real money finally arrives. You didn't buy something you couldn't afford because the price tag was too high. You bought it because it felt like proof of who you've become. And that feeling, quiet, comfortable, and completely convincing, is the most expensive purchase you'll ever make.